And also, Iranian military has called for a preemptive strike on a U.S. base in the Indian Ocean before U.S. strategic bombers stationed there can be deployed to attack targets in Iran. What could happen in such case? And do you feel that it could be as a negotiating tactics from Iran?
It is relatively implausible that I just spoke to you about the credibility of military threats, and frankly, that's not a credible threat that Iran's capable of conducting. Or if they did, as you saw with the response when they attacked Israel with over 200 ballistic missiles, we have the capacity to defend against such an assault.
And what is your assessment of the recent U.S. military strikes on Houthis in Yemen?
It's about time. The new administration is taking a much more appropriate steps in eliminating the Houthis' capacity and capability to continue to shut down the Red Sea. And I think you'll see a continued application of force in that regard.
Let's cover also recent incident with the Signal chat. White House confirms that a journalist has been accidentally added to this chat where attacks plan were discussed by U.S. national security team. How harmful is this for U.S. national security, and what is your reaction to such incident?
Well, the fact of the matter is sensitive communications at every level of one's government need to be protected, and the established means that exist to conduct those discussions need to be adhered to.
Also, U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has reoriented U.S. military to prioritize deterring China's seizure of Taiwan and also shoring up homeland defense by assuming risk in Europe. However, what is your reaction to such change of focus of new U.S. administration from Europe to China and Taiwan?
Well, it's a strategic decision that clearly the current administration is implementing. I believe that the national security strategy of the United States requires the United States to remain engaged around the world. This has been a fundamental tenet of U.S. national security strategies for over the last 30 years. And it doesn't mean that the United States is withdrawing from Europe, but the United States does recognize the significance of the capabilities and capacity that China under President Xi is building up and is responding accordingly.
Also, yes, President Donald Trump has directed to create an Iron Dome over the continental U.S. to protect the United States against the air threats from adversaries around the globe. What is your assessment of this idea of creating a big Iron Dome over the United States?
Well, it is a very challenging problem or challenging endeavor. It's important to recognize that Iron Dome over Israel's about half the size of the state of Rhode Island. For your audience, Rhode Island is the smallest state in the United States. So it's a very, very small area. And it's very different to conduct a point defense of a small area that's defined in a couple hundred square miles, as opposed to the entirety of the United States of America. So the Department of Defense is actively working to develop a concept of operations and an architecture that are going to be proposed, which will likely go to the White House and President Trump's consideration in the coming weeks. Now, the solution is going to need to include not just interceptors for ballistic missile defense, and there's some out there who believe that that's not even necessary, and that it's the more likely means of attack will be cruise missiles, and therefore a large component of this system may be improved air defenses using fighter aircraft and other means. So it is a program that is yet to be defined and will take many years to put into place, as well as significant additional resources, and these decisions have yet to be completed.
Also, President Donald Trump announced the Pentagon's decision to move forward with the next generation fighter jet F-47. Do you support this idea, and how could this influence U.S. military capabilities?
Well, I think that the President's decision to move forward on the F-47, also known as the Next Generation Air Dominance Fighter, is most likely to be the most important defense decision that he makes during his entire term. And that's because our entire way of waging war, integrating the operations of all our service components, depends on control of the air or air superiority. Without that, we place all our military personnel from all our services and their missions at risk. No major military campaign can succeed without air superiority. You're experiencing that today in your fight with the Russians. So by moving the F-47 forward with a contract award, President Trump is assuring the U.S. Air Force's ability to provide air superiority for the nation for decades to come. So I believe it's a great decision and look forward to continued progress on developing that aircraft.
I know as this project is still being prepared and assessed and also still in progress, but what could be F-47's chances over the Russia's newest aircraft like Su-57 and other new generation Russia's fighter jets?
Piece of cake. That is a American fighter pilot euphemism that it would be hands down the winner. And quite frankly, let me take you back to the current situation. If Ukraine had started this conflict, and I dare say Putin would not have invaded Ukraine if 3 years ago Ukraine had possessed a squadron or two of F-35s. These aircraft, modern fifth generation, and the F-47 is an example of the first sixth generation fighter, are so capable that they possess war deterring and war winning capabilities.
So it seems like to be bad news for Vladimir Putin, his worst nightmare right now.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you, General Deptula, for your time and for your support for Ukraine, and glory to Ukraine.
Slava Ukraina.
Heroям slava, thank you very much. From your perspective, would it be enough to force Putin to agree with ceasefire deal? I mean, this secondary tariffs and sanctions, even tariffs against countries which are buying Russian oil?
Well, I don't think on its own it would do that, but it would certainly put more pressure on. And it's clear that there is a lot of pressure sort of coming on to the Kremlin at the moment. Although one must sort of consider that Putin still thinks he's winning. Putin knows that if he loses or doesn't achieve his aims, and his aims were the complete subjugation of the 4 oblasts that Russia controls part of at the moment and Crimea, he also wants to decouple Europe from the US. If he doesn't achieve those, he's failed. And failed Russian dictators don't last very long. And I think Putin is well aware of that. So I think Putin is assuming he might as well fight on, because if he doesn't achieve what he's set out to do, then that's the end of him. Yeah, not only as the president, but probably the end of his life, because that's what Russians do to their fellow leaders. They get rid of them completely.
And also, however, Russia has agreed to a partial ceasefire in the air and at sea. Don't you think that this is special Russia's negotiating tactics, just to give Donald Trump something to declare any kind of a victory, but not enough to actually end the war? Do you see this as Russia's negotiating tactic?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the two ceasefires we've seen before, the 30-day ceasefire, the ink wasn't even dry on the agreement before Russia broke it. The partial ceasefire in the Black Sea really only benefited Russia, and they didn't agree to it. And at the moment, there is supposed to be an agreement that Russia and Ukraine will not attack energy infrastructure, but only overnight, last night, Russia attacked Ukraine infrastructure. So whatever comes out of Putin's mouth and his negotiators at the moment really means virtually nothing, because the Kremlin and Putin are just carrying on fighting and have made absolutely no concessions at all. So yeah, it's Putin talks positive stuff for the media, but does absolutely nothing in the way of stopping the fighting or moving towards a ceasefire. And hopefully now President Trump is clever enough to realize that, and realize that actually it is Putin who is playing Trump and not the other way around. And hopefully Trump and his advisors learn very quickly and get a bit smarter in their dealings with the Russian president.
It is also interesting that even during negotiations, Vladimir Putin was making hostile statements toward Ukraine. He said that his army would finish off the Ukrainian army, and also he has called up another 160,000 men. This is Russia's highest number of conscripts since 2011. Don't you think that this all developments and statements, this all is just another humiliation for Donald Trump as he tries to negotiate full ceasefire?
Well, absolutely. I mean, all the things you said are not the actions of somebody who's looking for peace. The calling up of 165,000 conscripts is incredible. I personally think actually Putin has made a serious error here, because those conscripts are not going to be from the far east of Russia, the ethnic Russians that Putin has been used so far. They are going to be, the sons of the elites in Moscow and St. Petersburg, and it's going to be very difficult to, dismiss their deaths when it comes. The last time at the beginning of the war, when Putin had a big drive to recruit conscripts, thousands of young Russians fled Russia, and we will probably see the same. Also, as you mentioned, attacks continue. Putin's vowed to destroy the Ukraine military, and he's come up with some ridiculous ideas like the UN should take over control of Ukraine. So I think it is a humiliation to Trump. And I hope Trump, and one of the challenges Trump has is, people like Pete Hegseth and Witkoff and others who are put in important positions are completely inexperienced and untrained for those positions, which is why they're making such terrible errors. Now, there's not much we can do here in the UK or you can do in Ukraine to change, who runs the USA. But let's hope that they are learning quickly, and Trump realizes that actually Putin has no interest in doing some sort of deal with the White House, and the only thing that Putin recognizes is strength. And really, that's what the best thing that Trump can do is to show his strong hand, his strong military hand, which is the only way that he can probably drag Putin to a negotiation table for peace and a ceasefire.
You just mentioned that Trump should use his strong military hand to force Putin to negotiating table. How do you see the military options of Donald Trump regarding Vladimir Putin? Because it seems like right now there is only economic discussion in the White House about secondary tariffs, sanctions against the Russian economy, but after the another weeks of stalemate, the discussions could also cover possible military options. How do you see these military options for Donald Trump, or even options of the last resort of Trump? Yeah.
Well, I think it's very important that the White House and Donald Trump address the terrible intelligence issue they had when the signal messaging conversation about attacking the Houthis and supporting Europe was plastered all over the media of the world. The most damaging thing about this intelligence leak is that, in effect, the White House was saying that they would not support Europe in their support of Ukraine. And that was devastating. If Putin thinks that the US will not help Europe out, then Putin might well think he can crack on and keep on fighting. It's only recently that European countries have actually suddenly realized the threat from Putin and have started to extend their military. Even the Germans now are looking to spend 200 billion euros to upgrade their military. But this is all going to take time. But European countries are now galvanized under the UK and France and are showing a strong hand. But if Trump and the Americans also said that they would be the backstop to support Europe and Ukraine, then I think that would change the metric, change the thinking of Putin. Putin assumes at the moment that America will not get involved in any fight to save Ukraine. Because that's what the Americans have said. And I think for Putin, he thinks it's a risk worth taking to keep on fighting if the Americans aren't going to get involved. So they need, ideally, they need to say, yes, we will get involved to support Europe and Ukraine if needed.
Also, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said that Russia was preparing another offensive operation inside the Sumy region to push forward in the Sumy region, Kharkiv region and Zaporizhia region. What are the Russia's chances for a big breakthrough right now, as Ukraine still sustains forceful and also a big defensive position right now, as Ukraine fights back and also sustains this powerful defense?
Well, there are a lot of rumors that Russia is planning to attack into the Sumy region, as you said, and by putting forces there. However, a lot of these forces, Russian forces, are very poorly trained. And I personally think it will be once again the classic Russia sort of meat grinder tactics, where they just throw more and more manpower into some sort of suicidal type assault. And as long as Ukraine has enough ammunition coming in from the West, then they should be able to hold it. I would say as well, in that area, I've been speaking to some of the people in the brigades there. The Russians are again using a lot of chemical weapons. We've discussed it before, their use of chloropicrine. I understand they're using it on a daily basis across the frontier, which is their method, their modus operandi to attack. Thankfully, I understand that there are many thousands of British gas masks, respirators, now on the way to their front line. So hopefully that'll enable the Ukraine defenders to fight better with British gas masks. But it is a concern. And the key thing is to make sure that Ukraine has the ammunition to defend against it. This is another area where Putin is probably feeling that it's worth doing this because the US are not going to come to the aid of Ukraine, which is why in our previous conversation we mentioned it is very important that the US do at least say that they will come to support, if need be, and before the European armies can get to the strength required to absolutely stop Ukraine falling to the Russians. But the summer is going to be a really telling time again, I think. But I'm confident that Ukraine has the military power and spirit to be able to resist this latest potential invasion.
Also, NATO Allied Supreme Commander General Christopher Cavoli recently testified in the Congress. He said that Ukraine has already solved its all problems with the lack of manpower. Ukraine has solved this problem. However, Russia still faces such a type of problem with manpower, with other lack of other weapons. What does this mean for this stage of the war, that Ukraine has successfully solved this problem with manpower?
Well, I mean, that's really good. And certainly when I was at the Tank Museum yesterday with General Zaluzhny opening the Ukraine exhibition, and there were lots of Ukraine soldiers and British soldiers there talking about the training that's going on. That was really impressive, and it appears that the training is going very well. Conversely, what Russia is not doing is training its conscripts, and an untrained conscript is pretty useless. So I think Russia seems to be unconcerned with casualties. Some figures are saying that Russia is approaching 1 million casualties, which is almost unimaginable. But a lot of it is because they're throwing untrained infantry soldiers, untrained tank soldiers into the front line who just don't know how to operate. And, unfortunately, they get it wrong and they get killed, and they get killed in their absolute thousands. Whereas, Ukrainian soldiers are getting good training, and they're now some very experienced soldiers who can pass on that experience to the newer people. So, as defenders, Ukraine is now, from a professional soldiering perspective, in a much better position than it was last year, and that is good news. But of course, what everybody wants is the fighting to stop as soon as possible.
Let's cover also our final topic, the coalition of the willing. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer is pushing forward the creation of coalition of the willing. This coalition will hold another summit next week in the NATO headquarters. What is your take on the current stage of military planning, which is going on in Europe right now?
I think the military planning is now pretty advanced, and certainly speaking to some of the British military planners, an awful lot of work has gone on, a lot of progress has been made, lots of training is happening, some of it combined training, some of it individual training. So the message coming out, the message that should be heard in Moscow is Europe is really serious about this. They have plans. They think that they have the right force structures and the right force to create what they're calling a peace enforcement force. This is one that has sufficient firepower to be able to deter and push Russians back if they do transgress. There's a lot of work going on providing a sort of air defense cover from European NATO air forces of around 140 fighter jets, and I gather that is well advanced. So, I think Europe countries led by Britain and France are taking this very, very seriously. They're committing a lot of resources, and they are planning to have to use this force if necessary. This is not some sort of hollow threat. This is not just politicians speaking, for effect. And hopefully the Kremlin realize this and take it seriously, because I don't think European NATO countries are going to slow down at all. They are accelerating their efforts, and if there is some sort of ceasefire soon, it would appear that European NATO countries, the coalition of the willing, is ready, willing and able to put a significant force into Ukraine to make sure that a peace is held.
Thank you, Colonel Hamish, for your time and for your support for Ukraine, and glory to Ukraine.
Thank you very much for having me. Glory to Ukraine.